Wow, to get started, I actually want to just talk about this idea of falling from grace, and when we're constantly facing challenges and how sometimes it takes a lot to get back up again. And just even if it's times of just feeling overwhelmed, where many of us may be feeling that right now at this moment as we're getting ready for spring break. So my name is Cara McFadden, and I'm going to talk to you today about the company we keep, and one of the things that I was thinking about is the importance of having some R&R to have good company. And so I have my own R&R, Ryan Rydell, who's my fiance, but most of the time when we're talking about R&R, we're talking about rest and relaxation. And so today I want us to reflect on our sense of relationships, respect, responsibility, resilience, and renewal. In community, relationships bring us together, and you never know when one is around the corner. Relationships concern the way in which two or more people or things are connected. If it's our friends, our family, our mentors, our mentees, our colleagues. And so today, to assist me in this, I'm actually going to use some excerpts from a student paper. I had a student who wrote a paper for a class here at Elon last semester, and the student asked to interview me about community. Well, I was like, this is pretty appropriate for today. And it touches on the idea of relationships, respect, responsibility, and resilience. And it provides a stage for me to reflect with all of you today. So the student writes, I decided to interview Dr. Cara McFadden. Dr. McFadden is the Danieley Neighborhood faculty director and is an assistant professor of sport and event management. I chose to interview her because I live in the Danieley neighborhood, and I think it is fascinating that she lives in the same type of building as me, even though she has a child and is a professor on campus. And I feel like she would have insight about what community means, end quote. My 7-year-old son, Kalen, and I live in the Danieley neighborhood. I take my trash out to the same place, eating in Daniel Commons, trekking from Danieley to Powell and the Oak House some days, and it's not that far. And it's good for us too to get a good walk in. But it truly opened my eyes to understand students in our community. Of course, not all, but to give me some more perspective. I'll go over to Daniel Commons at 8 p.m. and the place is packed. Students are eating with friends, studying in classroom spaces, engaging in conversations about what they want to study, or I'm not really sure what I want to study, but this seems pretty cool. And and then they see me, the real Dr. McFadden. Okay, Dr. McFadden going to DC 117 to teach her class, but also Dr. McFadden who's getting up in the morning, messy hair, sweatpants, sweatshirt to take her son to the elementary school to get ready for work. But they also see me as a friend getting coffee and chatting at Einstein's Bagels, or the mentor who is there to chat about their roommate, academic plans, study abroad, you name it. In community, we have to challenge ourselves to understand what might not be our norm to truly understand another's view. So that leads to respect. Respect is a way of treating our thinking about something or someone. If you respect something or someone, you admire that something or someone well. The student writes, the first question I asked Dr. McFadden was, what is your definition of community? And she took a couple seconds to think about it. Her response was that community is made up of stories, support, and challenges. At our best, we try to understand ourselves and then take the big step of understanding others, end quote. So at the beginning of each semester in all of my classes, I share with students the importance of self-awareness and how difficult it is to understand someone else when we don't sometimes even know who we truly are ourselves. I challenge the students to think about, what do people know publicly about us? Remembering that many people don't know what our fears are, if we had a bad day, or if we're celebrating something, or are we being challenged today? We are responsible for being aware of ourselves as we interact with one another. Responsibility, right? It's something we're required to do to be an upstanding member in a community. So if you're in Twisted Measure, you've got to show up for practice, right? To contribute to that community. We've got to practice on time. The student continues to write, when I asked Dr. McFadden how we should live as a community, she responded by saying that we have to respect each other's values, empower one another, be inclusive, and be ethical. I went on to ask her if she thought there was such a thing as a bad community, and she said there's not. But people tend to judge communities they are not a part of. Every community has their challenges and will struggle if they do the work together, which can be done by listening to stories and through support. Dr. McFadden worked at Virginia Tech as a graduate assistant in the Dean of Students office and was actually at Virginia Tech when the mass shooting occurred. She gave many details about exactly what happened and what her experience was like. I asked her how the community changed after the incident. She said, before, Virginia Tech was known for having school spirit, a strong bond between the students and staff, but after the shooting, the community definitely heightened around support. She said the whole town of Blacksburg and Virginia Tech came together. In class, we actually talk about how usually after a tragedy happens, the community comes together in ways never seen before, with the example of Virginia Tech. So the next part here, I'm gonna share a few moments of just some of my experiences while I was at Virginia Tech, and we're getting ready to celebrate the 9-year anniversary. And this is when I will look down to possibly check my time on my phone so I can proceed. Just to kind of give some perspective that day, I'd already worked full-time for 3 years before going back to work on my Ph.D. And it was 8 a.m. in the morning. We're meeting with our head orientation staff, getting them ready and psyched up for the day. They all headed out at 9 a.m. And one of my close friends, actually, who was my neighbor, worked at the magistrate's office. She was in Tennessee, and I actually got a phone call from her, and she's like, hey, I think on the scanner I've heard that there's been a few deaths on campus. And I'm like, what? Because we hadn't heard anything at that time. And so we began to get a lot of phone calls. The Dean of Students office that day, which only had about 10 full-time staff and 2 graduate assistants, became the main hotline for any phone call that was coming from a parent, someone in town. The challenges that day, though, that we faced as a community was the Roanoke Times local website went down, so people couldn't access the internet for information. People were unable to get through on phones and not really having a clear understanding of what was going on. Again, a lot of things happened that day, and I'm going to share some of my perspective, but there's a lot of details, and again, this is just my story. Later that afternoon, we'd already been getting phone calls about parents trying to decide if they wanted to come to Virginia Tech, and we were unaware of actually who was deceased at the time. So they opened up an emergency call center in our research area, and so we all went out, kind of like Elon Poll. We had multiple computers and telephones where we could answer phone calls and whiteboards that surrounded the room so we could write down any important information. There were about 10 to 12 of us who actually worked that evening until about 1 in the morning. It's unbelievable to think about the types of phone calls you would get in that kind of circumstance. Some from just people crying to say that they were sorry, others saying not so nice things such as, you deserve this. Some calling and saying, I haven't seen my daughter for at least 10 years. I think she might be a student there. People calling saying, what can I donate? Can I send baked goods? Can I give $500,000? So we were creating all this information. The most difficult time for me was later that evening, and this is usually when I get a little choked up. It was about 10 or 11 o'clock that night. So we had, there were 32 individuals who were deceased faculty and students, and from multiple states and countries. And typically what happens when someone's deceased is the authorities have to be contacted within that area. So families began to find out. Again, 10:30, 11 o'clock, I've answered the phone, and there was a mother who was on the phone, and she said to me, I just found out that my son, who was supposed to graduate with his master's, is dead. And I can remember his father screaming in the background. And that'll always be with me. I think it really has changed some of the things that I'm sharing with you today, just the way that I have perspective about life and what we need to do, and this idea of sense of community, no matter what the challenges are. But to talk about how we come together through these times, it's unbelievable. The first 4 days, I think I worked 80 hours. I can't even remember. Because I was taking out little, 32 baskets out to this main site, and the students were amazing because so all of our buildings are made out of Hokie stone at Virginia Tech, and I know students aren't allowed to steal bricks because that's an honor code violation here, right? Well, what students did is they actually took Hokie stones from one of the sites and created a memorial right outside of the admissions building, which is now where the actual formal memorial stands. So we were delivering items out there. We came together with a group of my doctoral peers that Thursday, and then folks started to say, hey, I'll help out. It's time for you to get some rest, right? And so we start looking out for one another. if I were to just give you perspective too of just some of the outpouring from folks from all over the United States and the world, if we were to take this room and the room behind us in the McBride gathering space, and we had huge posters and we rolled them all up and we stood them up, you would not be able to see the floor in here. And that's just posters. But some of the things also that we did to kind of come together is we had opportunities to find space around campus. We dedicated places where media were unable to actually access so that folks could have a place to be with friends and family. But one of the things that I think that this really showed me was the importance of relationships, if that was friends and family or being with those, because you wanted to be there. I didn't want to be anywhere else. The idea of respect, and respecting where people are, because people are at different places when we're handling challenging times. Just right now, as we're getting ready for spring break, we have things to do in our task, but we have to respect where people are. We have a responsibility to be there for our community during challenging times and to step up. And we have to be resilient, right? We got to figure out how we're gonna come back and recover from these difficulties and be tough. So, what I like to kind of wrap up with is talk a little bit about this idea of how do we get through renewal? How do we find a place where we can reflect on challenges or troubles that we might face, no matter how tragic they are or simplistic some may think they are? So first I want to just go back and talk a little bit about my heritage before we wrap up. My heritage is English, Scot-Irish, and I grew up Episcopalian. And what I wanted to do, though, was actually focus on my great-great-grandmother on my father's side, who was full Cherokee. Ever since I was a little girl, I can remember my father and mother telling me about my name. My birth name was Cara Wise. They chose Cara to stand for friendly light. In Cherokee, friendly light is translated to Ujai Nilai Ijahai. Now I have to say, though, there's some days that my light isn't very friendly. We try our hardest, right? Even through difficult times. But what I do is it helps me to kind of remind my students to really truly be present where we are, because time can be lost. And it's that space and that time that we can be. And what our challenge is to challenge ourselves to be our true self. I recently returned from a conference in Indianapolis, and the opening ceremony had a Native American chief share a traditional ceremony, which inspired me to really connect and think about my grandmother, and also the need that I have to be outdoors because I haven't been outdoors enough in the past month. But I felt it was relevant for us today as we are in the week before spring break, with many tasks ahead and in this time of renewal. So renewal gives us time to repair and to improve. So today, I would like to close with a Native American blessing. May the sun bring you new energy by day. May the moon softly restore you by night. May the rain wash away your worries. And may the breeze blow new strength into your being. And may you walk gently through the world and know its beauty all the days of your life. So thank you all for having me today.